Hypermodern openings are the best for chess intermediates. Ooh, that's a bit spicy, a little bit controversial. What the hell is a hypermodern opening? Well, it says here, in the early 20th century, hypermodernism challenged the long-held idea that the center needed to be occupied by pawns in the opening. Instead, the hypermodern players demonstrated that the center could be successfully controlled and fought for with pieces or indirect control of the center. Hypermodernism did not replace the old positional school, but it's viewed as an extension of classical theory and development of chess. Okay, so a little bit overwritten. However, basically saying we don't need to play d4, e4. We can try to challenge for the center from the sides or with some of our pieces. So for example, what I do, play b3 with the white pieces or b6 against everything with the black pieces, attacking the center using our bishops. Or it could be something else. It could be something like the Reti opening where you play knight f3, attack e5, d4, but you're not immediately putting a pawn in the center. And so I transitioned to these openings around the 1400 mark on chess.com, and my rating just went like this to about 1647. Which is curious because it was done in less than 500 games. Contrast this to people who have stacked up thousands and thousands of games on chess.com playing d4, e4. And so the simple reason why this has happened, to excuse my French, is because often my opponents have no idea what they're doing. Controlling the center is tough. In this video, I'm going to show you 4 of my games which illustrate this. In 3 of these games, my opponent is making terrible mistakes, positional mistakes, let's call them. But in one of them, I'm absolutely crushed. But curiously, that's against somebody who was rated almost 2000, which adds the necessary caveat here, which is that as you meet stronger players, they will find the critical lines to put you under pressure. Okay, so we're playing a world famous choreograph here. And so I have the white pieces and we have b3 from me, okay, following Adaban Basqueran's chessable course, which I bought. It has a monster 830 variations. That'll keep you going for a lifetime. We have d5 here. The alternative is e5, bishop b2, and already my opponent is making a positional error here by playing this move d4. And so this is very common amongst intermediates. They think that because there isn't a pawn in the center that they can just go ahead and push their pawn. The problem here is that this pawn is now just liable to attack, and so you can play very naturally in this position. Knight to f3, attacking the d4 pawn. It's hanging, c5, trying to defend it, e3, attacking the d4 pawn and threatening to take it. My opponent doesn't want to give up their central pawn like this, so they play knight to c6, trying to defend it. We have the very natural looking bishop b5, threatening to take the d4 pawn again. We have bishop to d7, and in this position, if you're wondering, there isn't really a remove the defender tactic. After bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, e takes d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. That isn't really a good idea because we have bishop takes g2. And so the engine is saying that the best thing to do in this position is just to castle. I don't do that. I play a little bit inaccurately here. We have e takes d4, and in this position, my opponent has knight takes d4. And here I miss a chance to win a clean pawn, so I could just play, for example, bishop takes d4, and if they take here, we take the c5 pawn, we want a clean pawn. If in this position, after bishop takes d4 they take, we have knight takes d4, and of course in this position, if they decide to take the bishop on b5, we are just going to take. Anyway, I missed that chance. We have bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, knight takes d4, c takes d4, castles, long castles, queen e2, f6. And this is a little bit of a dubious move. I think the engine says it's fine. But here, you can see what my opponent's idea is. They want to play e5. They want to blunt this bishop. And you'll see a lot of this in your games. People are worried about the bishop, and so they try to blunt it with these pawns on dark squares. However, in many cases, you can just break it up. Here, it's definitely dubious. e5 would be met by f4. And so we have knight to a3 developing. My opponent does indeed play e5 in this position. We can just undermine this structure. Very important to do this in your games, by the way. Don't let your opponent cement their structure like this. We have f4, and well, what can you do here? That threatens to win a pawn, after an exchange on e5. And if they decide to take on f4, that will just activate the rook. And so my opponent develops their pieces, bishop to e6, okay, very natural. We have f takes e5, f takes e5, opening up the rook, and the rook is looking pretty good here. Always a threat here of getting to the 7th rank as well. We have queen to c4 check, queen c7, and in this position I should be playing rook to f7, maintaining the tension, and if they decide to play queen takes c4, it just helps my knight to get away from the edge of the board. But anyway, I just took the queens off the board. I was thinking, well, in this queenless middle game, Surely I'm better because I'm going to put a rook here on the 7th rank. We have king takes c7, rook to f7 check. Maybe they should have played bishop takes c7. We have rook to d7, a little bit desperate here, trying to go for some simplification here. Knight to b5 check, very natural looking move that just wins a pawn. King c6, knight takes a7, and in this position my opponent resigned because they're going to lose this pawn as well. They shouldn't really resign at this level, but to show you what would happen after the king moves back, we can just deliver the check again. The king has to maintain defense of this rook, and so we have king to c6. We take here, they can't take, because in this position we would just take with our knight, win a free piece, and we'll also pick up this rook. So in this position they would have to play rook takes d6, and after knight takes d6, rook takes d6, we'll just win this pawn out on g7 outright. And so a pretty bad position to play, and it sort of unravels because my opponent is spending way too much time in the opening moving their pawns about, and it looks intuitive, but it's really dubious. You can see after this structure here, they've made what, 1, 2, 3, 4 pawn moves. They've fallen behind in development. It's not even a structure that can be held together, and they're ultimately beaten. Okay, so in the second game here, I have the white pieces again. This is a game that I have also total control over. However, I lose due to a mouse slip. Or am I just saying that? So we have b3 here again. This time we have e5 from my opponent. We have bishop b2. The e5 pawn has to be defended. Knight to c6. Following now Adebam Baskaran's course, we have c4 here, trying to discourage d5. It is a line. You can play d5 in this position. My opponent does it. The problem with playing d5 is that after c takes d5, queen takes d5, it's really easy for white. They can just play knight to c3 and the queen's got to move, so you're just developing with tempo. Nice and easy. In this position, the queen just has to go back, d6, d7, d8. My opponent does that. They go all the way back to d8. Just to kind of illustrate, and this is something that I face over and over again in my games, is this is a kind of mistake, not immediately, but it leads to losing errors. After a3, knight f6 is just basically losing, because after b4, where's this queen going to go? If you play something like queen to a6, we just got this fork. This doesn't work. You take my knight, I take your bishop. Let's follow that out. After rook b1, take, we have another fork here, and so we're just winning material. Equally in this position, if my opponent plays queen to b6, then in this position we have knight to a4, and here the queen is hanging again. And of course in this position, if they play this, we can't play e4 and trap the queen because my opponent has this resource b5, which is really annoying. Instead, just go ahead and hang the pawn, or that's how it seems. Queen takes b5, e4, and of course now the queen is completely trapped, and it's time to hit that resign button. So you see this immediate d5 push, very easy to deal with. Knight to c6, c3, the queen's just got to go back. It's easy from here. We have a3, f6, very similar to before now. My opponent is concerned about this bishop. They are trying to put pawns here on dark squares, try to blunt it, but that comes at the cost of wasting time in the game, but also it's creating these weaknesses around the black king. We have e3, bishop c5, a very common move against b3 players. Intermediates will play bishop c5 over and over again, but it's just a weak move. This bishop will just stare at this for pretty much most of the game. It's also liable to attack. I think b4 is a good move in this position. I play bishop b5, okay. It looks natural, trying to maybe damage the pawn structure here, create double isolated pawns, get control over the d4 square as well. My opponent has bishop to d7. We have b4 here, and my opponent in this position plays this interesting move a6. And this looks like you win material, but you don't. After, say, bishop takes c6, and b takes c5, it looks like you won a piece, but my opponent has bishop takes g2, and black is better. Obviously, you're going to lose a rook in the process. And so I realized this, and I played this move bishop to g3, basically making the threat of queen h5. And in this position, my opponent saves their bishop. They play bishop to d6, queen h5, and now they can't play g6 because after takes, you can't take back because the rook is hanging. And so in this position, my opponent realizes this. They play king f8, and it doesn't matter what the engines say in this position. It's just a terrible position for people to play. For humans, intermediate levels, the lower levels, we don't know how to defend properly. It's horrible to play these type of positions. It turns out that my bishop to d3 move is a bit dubious. So this idea of mine of playing queen h5 can be easily refuted. You might want to pause the video and work out what a good refutation here is. Well done if you worked it out. I'll give you a few seconds. And so a good refutation here is bishop to e6. And now if you play queen h5, then that's just obviously met with by bishop takes f7, sorry, bishop f7. But alternatively, if you just decide to take this bishop here on c5, you have queen takes d3. And black is better. And so bishop to d3 was a little bit dubious. But anyway, we got to this position. Bishop c4, threatening mate here on f7. Knight to h6, very natural. h3, stopping bishop g5 and potential traps of my queen, which would be really annoying. Knight to e7, queen to f3. Here, showing my inexperience in the game. Bishop c6, kind of tempo gaining move here. e4, knight to f5. Obviously can't take, the queen is hanging. Queen to h5, threatening mate here. g6, further weakening the squares around the black king. And really I should just be going all the way back, right? I should just be going all the way back to d1, but I hesitate to do stuff like that in games. I just need to learn to do stuff like that. This is just obviously a terrible move because my opponent has the tempo gaining move knight to d4. And it was in this position that I had this habit of doing this with my queen. And I just played this move, queen to f3. And of course, it's time to hit that resign button. What I meant to do was to just move here or here and obviously protect the c2 square. But never mind, that happens in chess. The key thing to take away from this game is you see this stuff over and over again from people when you play stuff like b3. You see these structures emerge on f6 and e5. Holes appearing around the black king, and also a bishop on c5, which is liable to attack here, and also staring at nothing. Okay, so in this third game, I get absolutely crushed. I have the black pieces here. My opponent is rated almost 2,000 on the platform, which shows here one of the key caveats, which is that as you play the more advanced players, they will find the critical lines and put you under a lot of pressure. And so we have e4, it's best by chess, Bobby Fischer, b6 against everything, following Lawrence Trent's chessable course. We have d4 taking over center, bishop b7, the e4 pawn is hanging. And so in this position, normally my opponents are going to play knight c3. And that's very kind of harmless, because I'm going to play e6, bishop b4, and keep applying pressure on this e4 pawn. However, my opponent finds this move bishop to d3, which I think is the way to go against b6 players. It develops a kingside piece, but also those kind of bishop b4 tempo gaining moves are not really available to black. And so we have e6, knight f3. You can see here, white is ready to castle. Okay, the benefits of playing e4. Following Trent's course here, we have d5. And in this position, my opponents normally play e5. And this is in itself a very annoying line, because after bishop a6, bishop takes a6, knight to a6, just trying to exchange off the bishop. Obviously, the center is now locked. White can follow up this annoying move c3, which threatens to win the knight outright with this check. So you're forced to play queen d7, and if you look at this position, you would take white. Black's pieces are kind of sleeping, white is ready to castle. And white has this kind of annoying pawn chain as well. And so my opponent doesn't do this. They play e takes d5. That's another line. And here, what's discussed in Trent's course is queen takes d5. I have to play queen takes d5. Forget about memorizing lines in courses. Playing e takes d5 is very, very naive. Because my opponent is ready to castle, this e file has been opened up and I'm nowhere ready to castle, and so there's going to be a lot of tempo gaining moves with rook e1 check, and is effectively what happens. So we have castles, knight to f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, rook e1 check. Here I need to stay cool and just play king f8. It's one of those times where, and I think I felt it, king f8 was probably the best move, but I really just wanted to castle, so I play bishop e7, terrible, queen e2. Now you can't castle because the bishop is hanging, and so the king needs to stick about for its defense. Knight c6 is a try to add a second defender here to the bishop. However, my opponent rightly plays this move bishop b5. We have a3, takes, and in this position, castling is of course now totally out of the question. We have knight to c3, queen d6, rook d1, bishop to d7, and of course now this is just a free pawn. This is a tactic that my opponent missed. Knight takes, d5, and you can't take because queen takes e7 is checkmate. They miss it. They play this move knight to e5. We have bishop to e6, and you can see the sorry journey that this bishop has made. Quite ironic. That's what I wanted to open up with, this terrible journey here. And we have f4, very natural, castles, queen f3, f6. I know that f5 is coming. I need an escape square for my bishop, but also want to kick this knight away. Knight to d3, rook e8, f5, it was coming, bishop f7, knight to f4, heading over here to e6. And yeah, it's just a terrible, terrible position. c6, knight to e6. The engine saying that I should take, but I didn't want a rook here on the 6th rank. Bishop to e8, knight takes f8, rook takes f8, a3, bishop c7, trying to go for the counterplay here, g3, along this diagonal. We have h4, excuse me, h5, no time to waste now. The position is very terrible. We've got to try and create some complications. Knight to e2, h4 in this position, knight to f4, getting ready to do the same thing as before here. We have c5. And in this position, if they take the rook, well, I can take this pawn here on h2. My opponent sees through this. Obviously, with check, they see through this. So they play h takes g3, rook e8, knight takes c7, quite right as well. Remove this battering ram. Rook takes e1, rook takes e1, queen takes c7, c3, and in this position, played this move, bishop to h5, just kind of hope chess. There is no perpetual. I was thinking that maybe if my opponent takes this bishop, queen takes g3 would lead to some kind of perpetual. It doesn't. My opponent correctly calculates, and after queen takes h5, just a free bishop, queen takes g3, you quickly run out of checks. Let's fast forward some moves. In this position, there is no more checks, even worse. This is, of course, checkmate. Okay, so in this fourth and final game, this is a game that I actually win. I have the black pieces again. My opponent opens up with e4. We have b6. And so curiously now, my opponent is rated in and around my level. So they're 16, 15. And so they're not going to find a critical lines. And so you're going to see this in this game. And so we have knight to c3, e6, bishop c4, bishop b7, knight to f3. And this is very common. You're going to see people do this over and over again. Okay, it's not losing, but what players are doing is they're just using the same setup that they use against everything. A bishop on c4, knight on c3, a knight on f3, a e4 pawn. But it's just not critical. And so you're making life quite easy for black. In fact, this bishop on c4 is liable to attack after moves like d5, which is effectively what happens in this game. We have knight to f6, e5. It's not a move. You also liberate this bishop. Again, you see people doing this as well. They're trying to shut the bishops down. They're also opening them up. They just really don't know what to do here. Here, I know d5 is a move. I've seen it many times before. Maybe en passant is the right way here, or bishop b5. Check, knight d7, the game goes on. Instead, my opponent naively plays this move. E takes f6. We have d takes c4. They have f takes g. Bishop takes g7. Okay, so their rationale might be that they ruined the kingside structure. There's this loose pawn here on c4, but in this position, my opponent needs to be playing d4, challenging for the center. It's telling me here, the engine, in which case we're going to just have en passant anyway. They play d3, and now they're just going to have a loose pawn on the d file. Because I take, and if they take with the queen, then we can go for a queen exchange, and I fancy my chances with the bishop pair and a loose pawn on d3. Okay, so they realize this. Instead, they play this move, c takes d3. Knight to d7, castles. Very naive move here, castling, because of rook g8, just opening up lines here to the king. Queen to e7, knight e4, long castles, very natural. Queen to a4, attacking the a7 pawn, but that allows me to get the move in that you want. Always when you long castle, you're looking for that king b8 move, and so obviously here it's quite natural. In this position, they just hang a piece. They play this move d4. We have bishop takes e4, and I won't show you the rest of the game. We just trade down from here and convert the game. But my opponent is just in a totally unfamiliar place. They're perhaps used to this kind of setup in maybe, say, the Italian game or something else, and where they know what they're doing, but against b6, it's just not critical, and it leads to a lot of trouble. One final point before you go is that you will say legitimately that this has got nothing to do with hypermodern openings. This is just because you're playing unfamiliar stuff, and so therefore your opponent is making a whole bunch of errors. The same would be true if you played some sideline in the Ruy Lopez Italian game. Your opponent would also make a whole bunch of mistakes, and that's true. However, I just enjoy the menacing bishops, the overextended pawns. It makes for a fun and entertaining game. Each to their own, guys. I guess at the end of the day, it's just a matter of taste. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.